Pain can become a major roadblock in terms of trying to stay active within your life. It can lead to a sense of fear around movement, or it can lead to complete physical inactivity. Both of these things can be harmful to our health. The question becomes, what do you do when exercise becomes painful, or if you have pain with a certain type of movement? To learn more about this, I recently sat down with Dr. Chris Hughen. Chris is a doctor of physical therapy, and he's also a member of the team at E3 Rehab. E3 Rehab is an organization with the mission of empowerment through evidence-based education. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
Let's get right into it. What should people do if they experience pain with exercise or movement?
Yeah, good question, Colin. I think one of the big things individuals should realize is pain doesn't equal tissue damage, or it doesn't mean harm, in the sense that every time someone experiences symptoms, that they have to be worried that they're injured or that they need to avoid all exercise or all movement. So I think people should feel reassured that some level of symptoms and some level of discomfort is a normal human experience throughout life, whether or not they're moving. And that if they're experiencing some discomfort or some pain while they're exercising, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're worsening their body, or that they're injuring themselves, or that they inherently need to change the way they're performing something. Having a more nuanced understanding of what pain is and how to manage when symptoms are too intense can be helpful. And that's what we're going to dive into today. But ultimately, I think people should feel reassured that they don't always have to feel overly concerned or worried or remove activities or exercise if they have some level of discomfort. Again, this is a belief that a lot of people are still being told, and still unfortunately feel that if there's any level of discomfort, that this means that they're going to injure themselves either currently or down the road. And aches and pains come with daily life. And one of the best things we can do is continue to move and continue to be active, and understand the strategies that we can use and be equipped with when symptoms or when injury becomes present, and we do need to modify when it is appropriate.
So what are some musculoskeletal conditions that you can safely exercise with if someone does have, say, an injury or some level of discomfort that's possibly a regular part of their life already?
Pretty much all of them. The notion that someone has an injury doesn't necessarily mean that we have to avoid exercise or avoid movement. I'll dive into a few different buckets or things people can consider. If someone's experiencing persistent or chronic pain, for example, chronic low back pain, chronic neck pain, persistent tendon pain, like a shoulder tendon pain, elbow pain, knees, Achilles, or persistent osteoarthritis, these things have been ingrained for a long time that if I have this chronic pain, I need to avoid movement or I need to avoid exercise. But more and more research and data suggests that movement and exercise is one of the best things for managing chronic and persistent pain. Not to say that it's going to eliminate someone's symptoms, but that generally being active and moving despite some level of discomfort, either locally at someone's low back or their joint, or more systemically, they have widespread body pain, exercise and movement and physical activity is one of the best things to maintain overall health and to manage the intensity of someone's symptoms. So from a chronic and persistent perspective, most conditions, it's okay and it's safe to exercise with pain. From an acute injury standpoint, if someone has an acute bout of low back pain, or they have an ankle sprain, or they have a hamstring strain, there are contexts and situations in these more acute scenarios where we want to protect that area temporarily. And each injury can be different timelines and different ways of recovering and managing those symptoms on the short term. But ultimately, with something like an acute low back pain flare-up, or with a hamstring strain or an ankle sprain, there's going to be a protective phase for maybe a few days or a few weeks, depending on the context. But then after that, the goal is to start moving and loading and exercising that area in a safe and appropriate manner. But even in these acute scenarios, this doesn't mean long-term we need to avoid movement and exercise. Temporarily, we may need to modify some activities that may be more sensitive than what we're comfortable with, or that may increase the likelihood of persistence of symptoms. But even in these acute scenarios, it is safe and recommended long-term to expose your body or that area that was injured back into movement and to exercise and the things you want to do or you have to do. Another area where we need to be a little bit more concerned about managing exercise in the context of pain is in these scenarios of what are called bone stress injuries. And this is a more niche topic, but for individuals that are endurance sport athletes, they may experience bony pain. And sometimes that bony pain can be in locations of someone's body and in certain bones that are considered high-risk sites. And if they start to or continue to exercise with levels of discomfort and pain, that may predispose them to more concerning things in these high-risk areas, like a stress fracture, like avascular necrosis, things that we really don't want to occur. So there are minimal contexts where we want to completely avoid pain, and something like a bone stress injury is one of those contexts. But for most people likely listening to this or watching, they're not in that scenario, and it's not something that they have to concern themselves with. So in the majority of contexts, for these general aches and pains, for persistent and nagging acute back pain or low back pain, chronically neck pain, there's very little instances where we need to fully remove or fully avoid all levels of discomfort. It's knowing that it's safe. It's one of the biggest recommendations to continue to move. And acute injury, we want to protect locally some of those tissues. That's on a short timeline. And outside of that, eventually we want to expose and load that area of the body to adapt and to get back to where people want. And then these very rare instances of what are called bone stress injuries and high-risk sites where we do really want to avoid and minimize any level of symptoms. But in most contexts, that's not the case for most individuals.
So it sounds like there's a bit of a gray area in terms of figuring out what is too much, when to back off, and how to adjust things. So that's really our next question here is, how much pain is too much? I'm guessing this is very case by case. And when should a person make that decision to back off? And how can they make those adjustments to their exercise or movement routine?
Yeah, this level of when is it appropriate to back off, it can be very person dependent, and it is a lot of times subjective decision and experience that someone's having with what is too much for an individual. There are some ways to conceptualize this and some heuristics. And if we're discussing these contexts of chronic persistent pain or someone's rehabbing in a more formal manner from an acute injury, we can have these guidelines to help people visualize and think through, when do I need to modify if my pain is too intense? There's a few diagrams and graphs and ways to consider this. One is the classic scale, 1 out of 10, 1 being minimal to no symptoms, 10 being the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life or you could think of experiencing. If someone's in this 1 to 4, 1 to 5 out of 10 level of discomfort, then we generally assume that this is a acceptable and tolerable level for someone to be, not only during an exercise itself or exercise session, but later in the day and the next day. If someone's symptoms are staying in that 1 to 4, 1 to 5 out of 10, we can feel confident and reassured that this is generally a safe and okay place to be. Another way of considering this is a green, yellow, or red light, where green is, we can still look at the scale, 1 to 3 out of 10. Yellow light would be 4 to 5 or 4 to 6 out of 10. And then a red light would be 6 or above. Looking at, is this movement or is this activity kind of in this green zone? Is it in the yellow zone? Then I'm, again, in a safe place to be. And looking at the stoplight analogy can be helpful for individuals. And then even a more simplified approach is just, are these symptoms or is this level of pain tolerable for me, or is it not tolerable? And that can be a little bit too ambiguous or vague for some individuals. And that's why having a scale or the stoplight analogy can be helpful. But looking at someone's level of discomfort within an exercise or a training session as a whole, or whatever activity they're engaging in later in the day and then the next day, those are ways to think through and decide, is this amount that I'm doing, is this new activity that I've tried, is this exercise that I'm performing, is it safe and tolerable for me? And if not, how can I modify either in the moment or in the next session? The other thing that I would consider is, if someone's in the moment having some level of discomfort, and for them, they feel that it's tolerable, but they also realize I'm adjusting the way I'm performing this activity. Whether it's you're running and you start to have some level of discomfort, you say that it's a 3 out of 10, but you notice that you're starting to limp on that side, or you're stress shielding away from that leg, or you're performing the activity or the exercise significantly differently. That's another way to think through, maybe I'm putting too much load or I'm doing too much this activity because I significantly have to alter the way I'm doing it. And that may not be accomplishing the goal of why I'm performing this exercise, or it may be an obvious sign that this area of my body isn't yet ready to handle these specific demands and it's trying to protect itself in a way. So that's another way to think through, is this activity too symptomatic, and do I need to adjust it in the moment or the next session?
So it sounds like doing too much too soon can be a factor at times.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right on. Well, I think we'll leave it there as a way to get the ball rolling on these types of conversations around pain and injury. But if anyone is interested in learning more about what you do or E3 Rehab, where can they go to learn more?
They can go to e3rehab.com for our website. They can look at our blogs, attached YouTube videos on a lot of these topics. We have consultations if someone has questions about their own pain or injury, or guiding how they're going to manage moving forward. We work with people remotely. All that can be on e3rehab.com. We also have Instagram, E3 Rehab, and then my own Instagram, Chris Hughen, just my first and last name. And then our E3 Rehab YouTube channel also has videos for a lot of these injuries and aches and pains that people may be experiencing, and very simple and realistic and pragmatic ways to go about managing your own injury or pain in the context of exercise and moving forward.
Perfect. Well, Chris Hughen of E3 Rehab, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Colin.